Before Jenna's behavior declined, our marriage had been much better. We met in college, fell in love, and married right after graduation. Those early years were filled with optimism and dreams of building a happy family and successful careers. However, life's pressures gradually weighed us down. Jenna's low-paying job at the university bookstore and the stress of my used car dealership took a toll. Despite the struggles, we tried to keep the spark alive and cherished the good moments. Over time, the cracks in our relationship became more apparent. Jenna's mood swings and irritability affected our family life. Our daughter, Carrie, noticed the tension and withdrew into her own world. I tried to balance work and home, but it felt like I was losing grip. Jenna, once affectionate and supportive, became a source of constant criticism and discontent. This environment led to our downfall. "I'm leaving," I said firmly. "Go and never return," my wife replied coldly. Usually I'd have hurled an insult as I left, but today I held back. Our 14-year marriage had seen many fights, but I always came back. This time was different. A few days later, Jenna realized I was serious. In the past 6 or 7 months, Jenna's language had become increasingly hostile. At first, I didn't notice. Her biting comments were harsh. I started avoiding her to prevent conflicts. I'd linger by the car longer or come home after Jenna and Carrie, our 13-year-old daughter, had finished dinner. Often I'd fend for myself, with leftovers occasionally available, but lately they ended up in the trash before I got home. My full name is David Kurt Kaminsky, but to avoid confusion with my dad, also named David, my family called me Kurt. I'm not a junior because my father's full name is David John Kaminsky. He didn't name me Junior or DJ, but chose Kurt since DK didn't fit. I'm of Polish descent and have endured countless jokes about it. In our small town of about 10,000, I'm the only person of Polish ancestry I know, and I've borne the brunt of many jests. Back to the main issue. I recently discovered that my soon-to-be ex-wife was not who I thought she was. About 4 weeks ago, I found out the truth. I had been spending more time away from Jenna due to her increasingly abusive behavior. After several nights without dinner at home, I decided to eat at a local restaurant one Monday night. As I sat in a booth, I overheard a conversation that caught my attention. I heard someone mention Pole, and then one man said, "So you've been having fun with a Pole's wife for a while now." Even before they were married, I entertained her on their wedding day, and he didn't know anything. I didn't recognize the first voice, but the second was my best friend George Curry. I was stunned. George continued, "Yes, we get together and have sex at least twice a month. Kurt is so busy in the parking lot, he doesn't even know." When the waitress came to take my order, I quietly said, "Excuse me, I have to go," and left without them noticing. I couldn't believe it. My wife with my best friend. George was even my best man and my mechanic. He is an independent contractor I exclusively use for my used car dealership. Despite the jokes about being a used car salesman, my business is successful because people trust me. George has always been a good mechanic, but he joked he wouldn't respect himself if he worked for a Pole. Despite this, he worked exclusively for me, which would be his undoing. I drove around, questioning if what I heard was true. Instead of hiring a private investigator, I decided to check Jenna's phone and email. That night, after she fell asleep, I found nothing suspicious in her email. Her phone, password protected with our daughter's birth date, revealed a few ambiguous messages, but none from George. His contact was there, but that wasn't unusual since he was my best friend. Still, Jenna's recent behavior made me suspicious. I tossed and turned, unable to sleep, staring at the clock until after 2:43 a.m. The next day, George came to the dealership and made a joke in Polish, which was usual for him. Typically, I'd chuckle and move on, but this time I snapped. "George, what do you know about Poland? I bet you couldn't even point it out on a map. You joke like all Poles are dumb, but I bet they could point out the United States and our state. Let's get to work." George looked stunned, knowing he couldn't point to Poland on a map. He was never book smart, just good-looking and street smart, especially with motors. In high school, I helped him graduate by doing his homework. Now, I was rethinking my choices in friends and my wife. I went to my office, closed the door, and pondered how to get proof of what might be happening. Confronting them wouldn't work. They'd deny it. I called a private investigator in Santa Fe, explained my concerns, and he suggested a few options. You could put a tracker on your wife's phone to know its location or install cameras in the house. But unless they're very good and expensive cameras, they'll likely be found. Even good cameras might be noticed if your wife is observant. I recommend tracking her phone and hoping to catch them at a motel or something. I thanked him for the advice and offered to send a check. You don't owe me anything. All this information is available online. I appreciate your help and will send a check. If you're ever in Silver City, stop by Kaminsky's dealership. I don't usually go to that part of the state, but if I do, I'll look you up, he replied. Part of my success in selling cars was making people feel valued. People need to feel important, and that what they do matters. I checked the tracking software and figured I could handle it. Then I saw the camera and realized he was right. He saved me money, time, and the embarrassment of buying noticeable cameras. That night, after everyone went to bed, I downloaded a tracking app on her phone and synced it with mine. It ran in the background without her knowing. I slept better that night. The next day at work, I checked the app periodically. She worked part-time at the university bookstore for 20 hours a week. She called the money she earned mad money and spent it on whatever she wanted, usually the salon. I checked. She was at the grocery store and later at home. George was in and out most of the day, but when Jenna was home, he was at work. So, at least that day, nothing happened. That evening, I decided to be nicer to my wife and daughter. I asked if they wanted to go out to eat, and my wife seemed to respond better. Carrie, our 13-year-old daughter, was reluctant but joined us. Dinner was nice. I mentioned George, and Jenna quickly changed the subject, raising my suspicions. I needed to know if George was right. I didn't check her phone that night. I couldn't access her calls or messages, so she either deleted them immediately or didn't text at all. As I got into bed, I said, "Thanks for agreeing to dinner tonight." "Thank you, Kurt. It was a nice surprise," she replied. "Maybe you'll get lucky today. It's been a while." We hadn't been getting along lately. Jenna finished her nightly routine and snuggled up against me. I had mixed feelings about possibly having sex with her. If she was cheating, did I want that? I decided to let her initiate. We eventually had sex, but it was very vanilla. At least I enjoyed the rest of the week, checking her phone location and finding nothing unusual. Saturday night, after she fell asleep, I checked her phone for messages or calls, but found nothing. I almost convinced myself that George was lying to impress someone with his sexual exploits. It wasn't the first time he'd done that. I'd known him since high school. I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m, I was still awake, staring at the ceiling. I got up and went downstairs for a drink, hoping it would help me sleep. With a glass of Jack Daniels and Coca-Cola in one hand and her phone in the other, I decided to check her phone again. I used the password, our daughter's birth date, and it opened to the home page. Suddenly, I remembered how difficult Carrie's pregnancy had been. My wife's body seemed to fight the baby. She was on bed rest for the last 3 weeks to carry her to term. Carrie was born exactly 9 months later on our wedding day. We were so happy, but she was a difficult baby, crying all the time and refusing to bosom feed. My wife told me during Carrie's second year that we wouldn't have another baby, which depressed me, but I understood because Carrie was exhausting. Babies conceived on the wedding night are called wedding night babies. If George was right, Jenna might have been pregnant before our wedding night. Jenna was on the pill, but we didn't wait until marriage to have sex. The doctor said wedding stress might have made the pill ineffective. If it was ineffective then, it was ineffective before. Now, I had to know. There was a 50% chance I wasn't the father. The phrase, "the early bird gets the worm," came to mind, but in George's case, it seemed literal. I went to the bathroom, found cotton swabs, and went to Carrie's room. She was now a sound sleeper, but it had taken years for her to settle into a normal sleep pattern. She snored with her mouth open, making it easy to swab the inside of her cheek without waking her. I put the swab in a plastic bag and repeated the process for myself. If Carrie was my biological daughter, I still had questions about Jenna's fidelity. If she wasn't, then everything would change. Sunday was chore day, and we each had our tasks. I spent time socializing with Jenna and Carrie to avoid drawing attention to my emotions. I was eager to know the truth, but I had doubts. Jenna asked, "Is something bothering you, Kurt?" I quickly replied, "I want to buy a lot of cars at the next auction, so money will be tight until I make some sales." "Don't overwork us," she said. She always referred to the business as ours, but I had incorporated the company to limit liability. We live in a litigious society, and I wanted to protect my personal life. I thought about paying off my credit cards and canceling all but one to improve our credit and protect myself financially if things went south. "Whatever you think is best," she said nonchalantly. This idea came to me at the worst moment, but it could limit the fallout if my suspicions were true. Early Monday, I took my samples to Western New Mexico University and spoke with the head of the science department. They agreed to help, and I offered a 10% discount on car purchases to anyone who worked with the samples. He appreciated the offer and mentioned, "I'm thinking of swapping my Camry for a newer car. I may stop by to see your selection. If you don't find anything you like, let me know and I'll help you find something," I said. "Thanks, I will," he replied. I drove away from the university with a concerned smile. The results could end my marriage. When I mentioned buying new cars to Jenna, I hid my worry. I decided it wasn't a bad idea and called Paul, my accountant and loan officer, into my office. "We're going to make it work," he said. "Paul, I also want to pay off my mortgage. Can we arrange a lump sum payment?" "I'll review the financials and get back to you this afternoon," he replied. As Paul was leaving my office, I considered calling my lawyer for a family attorney referral. But I decided to wait for the DNA results first, since I hadn't found any evidence of an affair yet. In the afternoon, Paul showed me the spreadsheet, and we discussed the next steps for both my plans. The next 2 days felt like the longest ever, waiting for the DNA test results. Late Wednesday night, the department head called and came over with the results and to check out a car. When he arrived, I directed him to my office. His expression told me the results before he spoke. "The two samples are unrelated," he confirmed. Though I expected it, the news still shocked me. He handed me the envelope with the results. "So, what kind of car were you thinking of?" I asked. "I just turned 50 and want a sports car, like a Mazda Miata," he replied. "I don't have one, but I'll be at the auction tomorrow and we'll try to find one in good condition. I'll call you this afternoon," I assured him. As he left, I told Anna, my secretary and office manager, that I'd be leaving early but would be reachable by phone. She rarely needed me, so I knew she could handle things. I drove around town, seeing everything differently. I called my lawyer, who referred me to a family lawyer. I made an appointment for the next evening. At a restaurant, I wondered if I'd wasted the last 15 years. I still considered Carrie my child, but biologically she wasn't. I knew I couldn't ignore what I had learned. George, my best friend, and Jenna would both pay. I wondered if Jenna knew Carrie wasn't mine. She had kept the secret of her wedding day affair with George from me. Now I believed she'd been seeing him at least twice a month. Anger built up, and I needed to be alone. I called Jenna to say I wouldn't be home that night. "Hey, Kurt," she answered. "Hey, I'm staying in Albuquerque tonight to be ready for the auction at 8 o'clock, I said emotionlessly. Okay. Have a safe trip," she replied. I don't usually go to Albuquerque for auctions, so this was unusual. I wondered if Jenna would take advantage of my absence. She'd have to explain Carrie's absence to my parents, which would be hard. Throughout the evening, I'd check her phone tracker to see if she went somewhere else. I drove to Albuquerque, planning to buy at least 20 cars, including a Mazda Miata, and arrange for their transport back to my lot. I needed to find someone trustworthy for mechanical inspections, since George wouldn't be getting any more work from me. He would see dollar signs if he knew about the car purchases, but I planned to keep it a secret until the last minute. I talked to local dealers at the auction to find a reliable inspector. I arrived in Albuquerque around 9 a.m. and got a room at the Best Western Hotel. Even though I owned the company, I couldn't justify the expense of a fancy hotel. The room and bed were comfortable, meeting my simple needs. I checked Jenna's cell phone and saw it was still at home. That night, I had trouble sleeping, replaying everything in my mind. Why had she done it? How could she justify having sex with him on our wedding day and twice a month for years? I began to reevaluate our marriage, realizing it had never been perfect. I had deluded myself into thinking we only loved each other. The first few years after we got married were tough. We didn't expect a child right away and planned to wait 3 or 4 years before starting a family. We had agreed on having 3 children, but Carrie's difficult pregnancy changed everything. When I found out my best friend was responsible, all our struggles felt pointless. 14 years of effort wasted. Despite the good times, this news overshadowed everything, making me wonder if Jenna's affair with George had been going on throughout our marriage. If she hadn't been with him, maybe her pregnancy wouldn't have been so difficult, and she might have wanted more children. George ruined my life by sleeping with my wife on our wedding day, and now he continues to see her twice a month, probably laughing at my ignorance. He would have to pay. I turned on the TV to a comedy show to calm down, and by 11 o'clock I was ready to sleep. The auction went great. I got some excellent cars at good prices and met dealers from around Albuquerque. I didn't see any Miatas at the auction, so I asked other dealers. 2 had them, one red and one black. They agreed to make a deal once I knew which color my customer preferred. Sure, they said. Just let us know what cars you have in the lot, and we'll work it out. I realized I needed to attend auctions more often. Networking with other professionals in my field inspired me to expand my business and took my mind off my problems. After lunch, I met with my attorney, and the news was grim. I would lose half of everything and have to pay child support and alimony, even though the child wasn't mine. That's when I decided against divorce. Instead, I'd leave her with George's baby, pay the mortgage, and keep the house in my name so she couldn't sell it. By continuing to pay taxes and utilities, she wouldn't be able to take the house. I also needed to protect my business. It was a corporation, but I knew I needed to consult my business lawyer to safeguard it. When I got home exhausted, I told Jenna, "I'm tired. I'm going to take a shower and go to bed." "Would you like some dinner?" she asked. "No, I had a late lunch," I replied. At least she thought to ask. The shower was rejuvenating, washing away my stress. I felt I was on the path to solving my problems and fell asleep quickly. After a week of stress, having a plan allowed my mind to rest. I woke up early, refreshed, and went to the office before Jenna and Carrie woke up. I had tasks to tackle and plans to execute. As employees arrived, I immersed myself in spreadsheets, financial reports, and sales projections. I informed Paul about purchasing 23 cars and our upcoming deal with a dealer in Albuquerque. I instructed Anna not to assign George any more work and to keep it confidential. She looked puzzled but said, "You're the boss." "Thank you, Anna. You're irreplaceable." At 9 o'clock, I called my business attorney for advice. "Your business is incorporated, but she might still force you to sell it for half its value. Have you considered selling it beforehand?" he asked. "No. Is that necessary?" "It would keep the business out of her hands," he explained. "This business is my life. I can't get rid of it," I replied. "Okay, I'll think about it and do some research. I'll call you at the end of the week." The news was devastating. I had poured my heart into building my business. It was my baby, unlike Carrie, I thought. Anger surged again. But as a good business person, I needed to compartmentalize and focus. I called Doug, the department head who confirmed George's claims. "Doug, I have leads on 2 Miatas, one red and one black. Interested?" "If the price is right," he replied. "What color do you prefer? I can bring it for you to inspect and discuss prices. Even if we can't agree, I can sell it easily." "Which do you recommend?" he asked. "Red is eye-catching but fades faster. Black looks elegant but heats up in our climate. Will you garage it when not in use?" "Yes, I can," he said. "Then go for red. It won't be in the sun much." "Red sounds great. When can I see it? Is Monday or Tuesday good?" "Sure. Call me when you're ready." I arranged a trade with the dealer for the red Miata in exchange for a BMW sitting on my lot for 3 months. George arrived soon after with several cars needing repair. As an independent contractor, he came and went as he pleased as long as the work was done on time. He overheard salesmen discussing the 23 cars coming in and asked, "When are the auction cars arriving? I need to schedule them." "They'll be delivered late this week or early next," I said, struggling to stay calm around the trader. "Okay, I'll contact Anna to get on the schedule," he said. I grinned as he walked away. That weekend, I kept my distance from Jenna, doing yard work and errands. I didn't bother checking her phone tracker. I felt nothing but contempt for her. Knowing I was raising someone else's child was unforgivable. Monday, I visited the car dealership again. I called the dealer in Albuquerque to pick up the Miata. He said, "Great, we'll have a late lunch when you get here." It was a nice day for a trip, so I informed Anna I'd be gone all day. "Hold down the fort," I told her. "Will do, boss," she replied. She really was irreplaceable. I thought, I need to give her a raise. The ride and lunch were pleasant, and the host made me feel welcome. Driving the Miata back with the top down was exhilarating. I decided to order a black one for myself. I needed to live a little. When I arrived home in the red sports car, Jenna and Carrie came out to see it. "Honey, why do you need this car? We need something with a back seat for Carrie," she said condescendingly. "I picked it up from Albuquerque for a client. Thought you might want to take it for a ride," I replied. "No, honey, I don't like small cars," Jenna said disdainfully. "Carrie, want a ride?" I asked. "No, Dad, I'm already teased about my last name. I don't want to be seen with a Polish used car salesman," she said, stunning me. Where did this disrespect come from? Jenna acted like Carrie had done nothing wrong. Now both women in my house disrespect me. Teenagers aren't supposed to be best friends with their parents, but her hurtful words made me feel like my family life was a sham. "Well, I'm going for another ride. I'll be back later," I said, driving away angrily. My marriage was deteriorating. When I returned at 9:30, I went straight to bed. Jenna came upstairs and with hallway light in my eyes asked, "Are your feelings hurt because we didn't get enthusiastic about the sports car? Aren't you going to spend time with your family? You're not only Polish, you're also a kid." Her attitude had to come from George. She spent time with him, and his disdain for my heritage was passed on to her and Carrie. Carrie wasn't my daughter. I needed to accept that. I may have to support her, but she's not mine. "It sounds like you two prefer not to have a Polak around, so back off," I snapped. I was furious, and her attitude only fueled my anger. She would regret treating me this way. Needless to say, the Kaminsky house has been quiet and cold ever since. The next day, I called Doug, and he came over to check out the Miata. He was thrilled. We talked numbers, and he was surprised to get a great price, $3,000 less than Kelly Blue Book. As he was about to leave, having filled out the paperwork, he said, "My best friend is in charge of purchasing for the university, and we change 16 cars about every 2 years. I know that's not a lot, but could you talk to him?" "I'm always happy to do business, and you know I'll make a deal with them," I said. "I'll have Jim call you later this week." "Thank you," I replied. That's how I grew my business, by treating people right and appreciating their recommendations. On Wednesday, I got a call from my lawyer. "Hi, Kurt. I think I have a solution to your potential problem. Would you mind stopping by this afternoon to discuss it?" "Of course, I can't wait to get started. The atmosphere around my house is becoming unbearable." At the meeting that day, I listened to the plan and liked it. It will take about 2 weeks to implement, but if it works, it will be worth it. During those 2 weeks, I quietly moved my personal belongings and tools out of the house and into an apartment in a neighboring town. Also, during those 2 weeks, George was anxiously waiting for those 24 cars to arrive so he could do some work and bill me. When he asked, I just put it off. This past weekend, I did yard work, and when Jenna and Carrie weren't around, I cleaned out the closet and dressers. Jenna did laundry during the week so she could do what she wanted on the weekends. It worked out because she didn't notice my closet emptying. So I went back to that Monday night. When I told Jenna, "I'm out of here," she was rude to me again and disrespectful to both the Pole and the used car salesman. I reinforced this by calling her a vulva. She hated that word. Then she exploded, and that's when I told her I was leaving. I used to go to a motel for a night or two, depending on how pissed off I was. On Tuesday morning after the explosion, I arrived early in the parking lot, and as my employees were entering, I asked them to go into the conference room. I closed the door behind them. I had weekly meetings, so this was not unusual. I started the meeting. "Good morning. As you all know, the cars I bought a couple of weeks ago arrived yesterday afternoon. They have all been inspected and prepped, so they are ready for sale right now. We are no longer using George to do any work. If he asks you, tell him we have decided to go in a different direction and leave it at that. You've all been amazing. You're like family, so it's hard for me to accept what comes next." I paused and wiped a tear from my eye. I sold the business. They all looked at me with surprise in their eyes. "However, as far as your job is concerned, nothing will change. Well, with the exception of Anna. You will take over some of my duties, and of course you will get a corresponding raise in salary." Everyone, even in their surprised state, began to congratulate Anna. They all respected her and knew she deserved it. "Anna, after the meeting, please come and talk to me. We will discuss some points. I'll still be involved, but only on a consulting basis, and I'll probably sell occasionally. I don't want to take sales away from any of you." They were all glad that I would still be around at least sometimes. The meeting was over, and as we walked out the door, George was standing there. "Hey, why wasn't I included in the meeting?" he asked. He had been included in most of the previous meetings. "Because this is a staff meeting, and you're not a staff member." He paused for a moment, then said, "I see the cars have finally arrived. I'll start repairing them right away." "No, they've already been thoroughly inspected and prepared for sale. Nothing needs to be done to them," I said sternly. He looked at me stunned. "But I check all your cars, Kurt. What's going on?" "George, I sold the business, and the new owner wants to move in a different direction," I told him, not wanting to escalate the situation. I realized sometimes it was better to say fewer words. "I can't believe you sold the business," he exclaimed. "What am I supposed to do now?" It was clear he was only thinking about himself. He was effectively out of a job. "Well," I said, "you can pick up your check for what you've done in the last 2 weeks." It wasn't much. Anna had only used his services a few times. He'd relaxed before delivering 23 cars, thinking he'd be busy when they arrived. How wrong he was. I didn't feel sorry for him at all. I just wanted to tell him it was because he was a traitorous idiot. Meeting Anna, I asked her if she could keep our conversation private. Of course, Kurt. You know I would never say anything you didn't want me to, she assured me. Okay, here's the deal. I've set up companies incorporated in Nevada. One company buys this parking lot. The other buys another company. I am the sole owner of stock in both. At some point, I will divorce Jenna and ensure she doesn't get this business. Why? She asked. I moved out of my house. Jenna doesn't know it yet, but I'm not going back. She's having an affair with George. Carrie isn't really my daughter. I believe she belongs to George. I don't even know if Jenna knows, let alone George. They'll find out soon enough. I will not seek a divorce, but will continue to pay the utilities and taxes on our house. That way she can't say I left her and take everything I own if she files for divorce due to irreconcilable differences. I don't want her to be able to take the business. That's why I've arranged for the company to be bought twice. Let them try to figure out what's going on. The proceeds from the sale will be used up by the time she gets around to finalizing the divorce. Besides, I'll make next to nothing on consulting and a few sales commissions. Anna, you are quite capable of handling day-to-day affairs. I'll be ready to call if you have any questions. But let me just say that I trust you and trust your judgment. The smile returned to her face. When I told her about the new owner, but when she heard about Jenna and George, she looked like she was ready to shoot someone. She was a woman I truly admired and respected. I continued. I have one more task for you, and then I will leave you. I need you to order new signage and letterhead. We are changing the name of the business. This will further cement in George and Jenna's minds that the business was sold to someone else. The new name will be Graceless Auto. I spelled the name to make sure she got it right. She looked at me with bewilderment. Someday I'll tell you why I chose that name. Suffice it to say it tells the whole story, I said. She still looked puzzled, but trusted me enough to follow my instructions. With those words, I left, saying a few farewells to everyone. I got into my Audi and drove toward Albuquerque. After about 2 hours, my phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Jenna. I hadn't expected her to call until this evening. This had happened many times before. I'd go away for a day or two, she'd call, we'd talk, and I'd come back. Things would change for a while, then we'd go back to the same routine. After a while, we'd fight again, and the cycle would repeat. I decided to answer, expecting her usual nonsense. Hi, I said through the speakerphone. Kurt, what's going on? She asked, somewhat uncertainly. Nothing, just going to Albuquerque, I replied. Why are you going there? She asked. To get the car, I replied flatly. So what I heard wasn't true, she asked. So George had called her. Figures. Call your mistress to find out what's going on with her husband. I don't know, I said. What did you hear? George called and told me you sold the business. Why would he call you? I asked, catching her off guard. She corrected herself. He's your best friend. He was wondering if I knew what was going on. Best friend? What a joke. I was a joke to him. A stupid Pole, helpless and unaware of what was going on behind his back with his trashy wife. I guess my family was embarrassed that I was a used car salesman. So, yes, I sold the business. Now you don't have to carry that stigma anymore. Shouldn't we have talked about this first? She asked, probably worried about how we were going to manage. It's my company. I owned it before we got married, and I can sell it whenever I want. I just hope the new owner treats my former employees well. So, did you get a good price for it? She asked, worried about her standard of living. It didn't bother me. I just knew I needed a change. I'll start looking for a new job after taking a few weeks off, I said. What about the mortgage? She asked. Oh, I used the proceeds to pay off the house. You don't have to worry about that. All we need to do now is pay the utilities and taxes, I replied. What about food? Gasoline? Insurance? She asked, almost hysterical. Oh, I guess I'm a stupid Pole. I didn't even think of them. Do you think you could take more hours at your job? I said, sarcasm tinging my voice. She was getting frantic. When are you coming home? She asked. There it was, the moment of truth. I'm not, I said without hesitation. What I told you last night, I was leaving. You told me not to come back, so I'm not coming back. Don't worry. I'll find a way to pay all the utilities so the lights won't be turned off. You can't do that, Kurt. You have to come back, she cried, desperation in her voice. No, I really don't, I said calmly. Kurt, don't do this, she pleaded. I already have, I said firmly. What about your daughter? She asked, trying to tug at my heartstrings. You mean Carrie? The girl who's ashamed of her last name and the fact that her old man was selling used cars? I said. Kurt, she's just acting like a 13-year-old girl. You can't take it personally, she reasoned. Well, it doesn't matter anymore. I'm not coming back, so none of you will be embarrassed by me, I said, ending the conversation. With those words, I hung up and turned off the phone. Let her think about it. I knew she was trying to call me back and would be annoyed that I wasn't picking up. I calmed down after the call and tried to enjoy the leisurely drive to Albuquerque. I assumed her next call would be to her lover for more information and to tell him what I had said. When I reached my destination, I turned my phone back on and saw 5 messages. I listened to them all, 3 from Jenna, 1 from George, and 1 from Anna. I called Anna right away. Hi, Anna. Sorry, I turned my phone off. I've been getting some unwanted calls, I said. Yes, I know. Your wife and George called me to find out where you were. I told them you no longer own the place, so you're not stopping by anymore. I hope everything is okay, Anna replied. Perfect, I said. If they give you a lot of trouble, tell them you're calling the police about phone maltreatment. I like that, she said. Kurt, you may feel like you don't have family or friends anymore, but trust me, you do. We are your family, and we always will be. Thank you, Anna. You knew what to say. I hope your husband knows how lucky he is, I said. Believe me, he knows. He tells me all the time, she replied. Never lose that. Never take each other for granted, I advised. I'm not going to, she said. I hung up and wondered whether to call my cheating wife or the backstabbing idiot. No, I'd let them handle it. I got out of the Audi and entered the car dealership's office. The owner was waiting for me. I have the Audi I told you about. Would you like to see if we can do a trade-in? I asked. Let's see, he said. He was impressed with the condition of the car inside and out, as well as under the hood. He looked at me and said, I can sell it in a week. Are you sure you want to do a trade-in? I think I'll get a better deal in the future. You can reciprocate. I'm not here to make money. I'm here to get a sports car, I replied. Half an hour later, I was back on the road with the top down, enjoying the ride. Now I had to decide where to go. North sounded good, so I headed for Santa Fe. For the next 2 weeks, I traveled through northern New Mexico, Arizona, southern Utah, and Colorado. I wanted to be nearby in case Anna needed me. I called her several times, and when it was clear she had everything under control, I decided to head west. Sure enough, I kept getting calls. First, they were annoyed, then apologetic, and finally downright cowy. I listened, but I didn't care. When I got the call that my credit card had been canceled, I just laughed. When George called and told me I was a terrible person for leaving Jenna and Carrie so easily, I laughed even harder. I got a call from my lawyer. Jenna had threatened to file a child abandonment petition if I didn't contact her. I called him back. Hey, it's Kurt. So you've been getting threatening calls from my wife, I said. Yeah, but I wouldn't worry about it. If you're still paying for the house, she'll have a hard time proving it, he replied. I can do something better for you, I said. I have a tape of me telling her I'm leaving and she asked me not to come back. That's awesome. Send me a copy, he said. If she gives me any trouble, I'll pass it on to her lawyer. Let her lawyer try to put pressure on her. Thank you. I'll call you in a week to see how things are going, I said. I've traveled all over the Southwest. The Miata wasn't the most comfortable car, but it was fun. There were lots of people looking at me, even getting glances from bored, aroused, middle-aged women. But I wasn't aiming for that. After all, I was still married. I went to Reno, then Lake Tahoe, the coast, Napa Valley, and Highway 1, looping along the coastline. I stopped in Yosemite, then San Diego, through Death Valley to Vegas, and finally Phoenix. I took my time. I stopped at parking lots, talked to the owners, and chatted about this and that. Some were jealous that a guy in his early 30s could just take off and travel. After traveling for about 3 months and 8,000 miles, I decided to return to Silver City. I stopped by Bezradny Auto and was greeted by my entire team. There were several new faces. They all welcomed me back. When I walked into Anna's office, formerly my office, she looked up. When she saw me, her smile widened. She stood up, walked around her desk, and gave me a big hug. We talked for a while, and then I asked, Do you think I could have everyone over to Wrangler's to eat and drink? Could you close the store at 5 o'clock? It was 3 o'clock at that point, and I have some errands to run. Of course I'm going to push for it. The whole team will be there. I said goodbye to them and told them I would see them in 2 hours. They were in a good mood. I visited my attorney, who had informed me earlier that Jenna had tried to disinherit me to get all of my assets, but he was able to thwart her attempts. We talked about what to do next. At 5 o'clock, I met up with the team at Wrangler's restaurant. We had a great dinner and enjoyed chatting with everyone. After about an hour and a half, they started heading home. Finally, it was just me and Anna. She looked at me and said, "You know, Kurt, you may think you're helpless and vulnerable, but you're wrong. You just trusted the ones you loved." I looked at her. "So you figured it out, huh?" "Yes. It took me a while. But you said the new name reveals the whole story. It kept me thinking until I figured it out. You can be Polish, but the jokes don't describe the real you. They're an insult to you and your heritage." "Thank you, Anna. You're the main reason I came back. I had to see how you were doing with my duties. I'm happy to say that you didn't just fill my shoes. You made your own pair." "I had a great mentor," she said gratefully. We hugged, and she went home to her husband. He really was a lucky man. I went back to the apartment I hadn't been in for 3 months. It was musty and needed a good airing out. I opened the windows and let the cool evening air fill the rooms. I grabbed a beer and sat on the deck overlooking the pool. There were a few people swimming and a family playing. Jenna and I had hoped and dreamed so much when we got married. Now it was all gone. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was about 8:30. I thought it was time for a showdown. I got up, jumped in my Miata, and drove to my house. Technically, it was still mine. I had bought it before Jenna and I were married, and the deed only had my name on it. When I pulled into the driveway, I was disappointed. The yard wasn't well maintained. In fact, it looked like the landscaping hadn't been touched. The lights were on, so I figured Jenna was home. I walked to the door and knocked. A minute later, Carrie opened the door. Her eyes widened and she asked, "Daddy? Hey, Carrie, is your mom home?" She stuttered, then screamed, "Mommy!" I heard Jenna yell from the kitchen in a strained, shrill voice. "What the hell is this?" She kept looking at me and said loudly in response, "Daddy?" Jenna came around the corner, saw me and screamed, "Where the hell have you been?" I decided to answer her shout in a calm, even voice. "Traveling." At that moment, George came out of the bedroom wearing only boxers. "Oh," I said, "the whole family is here. Mom, Dad, and the baby." "What the hell are you talking about?" spat Jenna. "I suppose George moved to take my place, as it is his by right." Jenna looked puzzled. Carrie replied, "He lost his apartment after you fired him, and Mom needed a man to help pay the bills and do other things. Since you left, you could feel the rage in her voice." "Well, young lady, it seems you have been misinformed." She hated it when I corrected her. "George was never my employee. At his insistence, I couldn't fire him. As for the bills, all the utilities are paid, as is the car insurance." "What about the groceries and gas?" shouted Jenna. "You had a job. Did you lose it? I know it used to be just your mad money, but it was enough for groceries and gas while I was gone." "So you think you're going to come back and move in with us right away?" she asked. "No, I'll wait until you and your lover find a place of your own." It was obvious they were sleeping together in my house, and Carrie seemed fine with that. "I'm not moving out of my house," said Jenna. "Correction, this is my house. It was mine before we were married, and only my name is on the deed," I replied. "Well, you left. Now it's mine." "The law doesn't work that way. Because I paid the utilities and taxes, I am still the legal owner. Even though I was away for a short time, I still own it. Don't worry. I'll give you lovebirds until the end of next month to find a place to live. Just don't forget to bring your daughter with you." "What do you mean, your daughter?" "She's our daughter." "Truer words cannot be spoken," I said with a smirk. Jenna looked puzzled. I then turned to Carrie. "Carrie, I know you hate being called Polish, so I have good news for you. I'm not your real father. George is—" The silence in the room was deafening. After a moment, Jenna meekly asked, "What?" "Yes, Jenna. It looks like your little indiscretion on our wedding day resulted in a baby, just not mine. But you have good news, Carrie. You can now take your real daddy's last name and become Carrie." Carrie. I wonder if Mom insisted on the name Carrie in memory of her lover. I looked at Jenna, and she looked at George. He was white as a ghost. "What? George? You don't want to be a daddy? Well, that's too bad. Take the responsibility. Look on the bright side. It's only another 4 years, then college." Jenna and George said almost in unison, "I don't believe it." I tossed them the DNA report. "See for yourself." They grabbed it, looked at it, and then both fainted. "Carrie, tell the lovebirds that your mom will be served with divorce papers sometime next week, along with an eviction notice." I turned and walked away. The whole time I was gone, I wondered if the affair had lasted throughout the marriage. In fact, I wondered if she had been faithful to me at all. We met when she came in to buy a car. George was working on the car, and we both thought she'd be a great choice for a date. Did she pick me or didn't she? I was indeed joyless, clueless, helpless, and vulnerable. All the while, George was laughing at me behind my back and making Polish jokes to my face. I went back to the apartment and had a few beers. In the morning, I visited my lawyer and asked him to start the paperwork. I knew I would have to sell the house and split the proceeds, but as a barely working man, I wouldn't have to pay alimony or child support, especially since another man had already taken my place. At least, that's what I hoped. I loved Jenna and George, too. The betrayal was unbelievable. I wouldn't be able to trust anyone, male or female, for a long time. Maybe I should see a therapist. When the divorce proceedings dragged on, I went back to work at the car dealership. But as a salesman, I made it clear to all the employees that I was no longer the boss, and that I only needed one sale a week to pay the rent and buy groceries. In fact, I insisted that there was only one. When it came to court-ordered child support, I wanted to have no money at the end of the month other than my own meager living expenses. Jenna hired a lawyer. I don't know how she could afford it. Maybe he was doing it pro bono. He's going to be surprised. They checked my bank accounts and saw that I had spent the funds from the sale and even checked the transaction itself, but found nothing wrong with it. They didn't dig deep enough. I learned from my fellow salespeople that while I was away, George talked to Anna almost every day for the first 2 weeks, wanting some kind of job. She had no problem telling him no every time. Eventually, he gave in. Now he wished he had never gotten his AS certification because the only job he could find was at Valvoline Quick Oil Change, where he was making $13 an hour. I hoped Jenna had switched to full-time work, or they would have a hard time making ends meet. I contacted the realtor and informed Jenna that I was putting the house up for sale to split all of our possessions 50-50. She had already been served with an eviction notice, so she had to move out before the house was sold and closed. One night, there was a knock on my door. Of course, it was Jenna. I opened the door, looked at her, and asked, "What do you want, Jenna?" "Can we talk?" Jenna asked. "I don't think it's a good idea. We're litigating against each other," I replied. "Come on, Kurt, it's just me here. No lawyers. Can't we sit down and have a polite conversation?" "Yeah, I guess so. But let's go to Denny's," I said, thinking to myself that I wanted witnesses. I didn't trust her enough to be alone with her. We were sitting in a booth at Denny's restaurant, and after a couple of minutes of pleasantries, I asked, "Why, Jenna?" She looked at me, hesitated, and said, "I guess the simple answer is that I liked you both, and I couldn't make up my mind." "So you were dating both of us at the same time?" I asked. She lowered her gaze to the table and replied, "Yes. But George asked me not to tell you anything because he knew it would ruin your personal and working relationship with him." "When I asked you to marry me, why did you say yes?" I questioned. "Because I loved you," she said. "What about George?" I asked. "I loved him too, but I knew he would never be a husband. When you asked me, he and I discussed it and ended our relationship. I wanted to focus on us and preparing for the wedding," she explained. "So on our wedding day, when you let him have sex, you said, 'I'm marrying him, but you're still my man,'" I said. She began to cry. "It wasn't like that," she protested. "So what was it, Jenna?" I pressed. She hesitated, then said, "I didn't want to lose him, and he didn't want to lose me." "Well, now you have each other and your baby. By the way, you did a great job coming up with a name for her. I didn't even memorize it until I had time to think about it during my 3 months on the road," I said. "I didn't know Carrie wasn't yours. I really didn't," she said, looking at me. Then she added, "Kurt, I wanted to talk to you tonight to tell you that I still love you. It's nice to hear you say that, Jenna, but I don't think you know what love is. I loved you more than anything or anyone else, but you obviously can't say the same. I loved you, but I can honestly say I don't anymore. I loved you with all my heart, but now I have nothing but contempt for you." When I said that, she looked up at me and realized that our relationship was over. There would never be an us again. I had to ask her another question. "Have you ever stopped?" She hesitated, then apparently decided it didn't matter and told the truth. "We never really stopped. We had lulls, but we got together usually twice a month." I was hoping for a different answer, but either way, I was glad she told me the truth. "One more question. What happened about a year ago that made you treat me so badly? Your whole attitude began to change. The outward disregard became obvious." Her face reddened, and then she got a little angry. "George started talking me into having a ménage à trois, but not with you. I could probably do it if you were involved, but we couldn't find a way to do it. He kept insisting on it, and it made me resent you for something I know you would never do. I know it sounds strange, but I thought I could make my two men love me together and resented you for not being the kind of man who could allow it. So, have you ever done it? I asked. No, I thought about it. But then you left and my whole world came crashing down. Well, now you can do it, knowing that I don't care what you do. I don't care anymore. We both knew the time for talking was at an end, so I paid the bill and we went to our cars. 4 months later, we stood before a judge, and he declared us divorced. George was there too. As we were leaving the courthouse, Jenna said, "How about an old-fashioned drink?" "Sure," I said. By this time, the dislike I had harbored for the two of them was gone. Then I thought, this will be the last time I have to be with them. From now on, they can be alone together. Let those pigs live in their own filth. They deserve each other. Ha! Jenna will have to get used to a lower standard of living. Okay, so maybe the hostility wasn't completely gone. We drove to Wrangler's, and as we walked in from the parking lot, I thought this sounds like the beginning of a joke. This one started like this. A crooked vulva, a conniving creep, and a Polish guy walk into a bar. The bartender yells as we walk through the door, "Hey, we don't serve the likes of you here." The vulva and the creep look at each other. Then the creep says, "Hey, you can't refuse service just because he's Polish." The bartender says, "The Pole can stay, but the health department won't let us keep vulvas and creeps in plain sight in a catering establishment." It was Gus. I had offered him a great deal on a classic car someone had traded in, and he's treated me like royalty ever since. He loves his 1972 Gran Torino and treats it like a child, cleaning and polishing it from the front chrome to the taillights. I may be Polish, but I'm a respectable man.